Today's episode is brought to you by the Tax Defense Group. The team of professionals at the Tax Defense Group are passionate about helping taxpayers resolve their tax debt. Their services include basic tax preparation, tax audits, resolving large tax debts, and more. They actively represent taxpayers throughout the entire U.S. Call today at 800-850-7973 to get started. That number again is 800-850-7973, and you can visit them online at thetaxdefensegroup.com. We recently launched our website, ucaststudios.com, with articles about sports, special interest topics, and more. We have some cool stuff on our site. To read our content, please visit ucaststudios.com. Hi, welcome to the Great Western Podcast. This is Marcus, and I'm joined again by Jonny Arnett with the Jonny Arnett YouTube channel. Thank you for coming on, and today's episode is going to be Game 4 of the NBA Finals in 1987. So Lakers are in Boston Garden. This is a pivotal Game 4. Lakers are up 2-1 in the series. Yeah, Jonny, what were your thoughts after watching this game, after rewatching it again?
Well, it's one of the more iconic games, the Lakers-Celtics rivalry, and I just forgot. It's been a little while since I've seen this game. I forgot how much drama there was. There was a couple moments that kind of broke out into a fight, which again, every time that happens in the 80s and it's like an NBA finals or, conference finals and that takes place, it's always kind of shocking to me because that would just break the internet if an NBA finals involved a fight where guys are literally swinging at each other. But there was a lot going on in this game, and for a while it looked like Boston was going to come out on top. And so I just forgot how much the Lakers had a rally in this one. It was really a fantastic game.
No, man. I mean, you're totally right. I mean, I feel like, could you imagine watching this game while it was actually going on? I mean, so at one point the Celtics are up by 16, and I mean, it's kind of a reversal of the last game that we talked about, where basically when it was the Lakers versus Rockets in '86, it was, they were leading the entire time, and then right at the end, they lost it. In this game, it was kind of a little bit of the opposite story. I mean, it wasn't like they only won it right at the end, or they only led right at the end, but it almost, yeah, I guess it was pretty much very similar, where they're behind the whole time, and they're just scraping and crawling to come back. And I mean, I feel like it was kind of like this game kind of felt like quintessential 80s basketball, at least in regards to who's doing what, and I don't know if you want to call them the brand names doing stuff, but did it kind of feel like that to you?
Yeah, a little bit. The Lakers definitely looked like they were out of their element. It's funny because it really felt like they stole this game. If you'd watched the duration of the game, and you missed the final few minutes, I mean, you'd feel comfortable betting big money that Boston was going to win this game, because the Lakers weren't running the fast break successfully for most of the game. It was really kind of a slow half court, just kind of taking your time, running things through the post type game, which really benefits Kevin McHale, Larry Bird, and the Celtics. So it was crazy because they were down by 16 points. There was only 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Actually, there was a little bit more, but then the Lakers start charging back, and the game gets close. And then with 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter, they're down by 8 points. So, I mean, right up till the final minute or two, it felt like Boston was completely in control. And I mean, I just wonder if the players ever look back at this game and just have so much regret. I know Larry does with missing that shot right at the buzzer, but really it was theirs to lose, and they lost it.
Yeah, I mean, you raised a really good point. I mean, the last 2 minutes, the Celtics are up by 7, and from the 2 minutes, 1 minute mark, I mean, the Celtics commit so many mistakes, missed shots. The Lakers, I mean, they did a horrible turnover, and I mean, I don't know, the Lakers, they just, I think you put it really well, where I think they just kind of stole it. And I think, I couldn't envision, like you were saying. I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that Bird and the Celtics had already won multiple titles, and the Lakers had already won multiple titles by this point, I definitely could see it probably really impacting their psyches. I remember hearing before that Jerry West, all those years that the Lakers went to the NBA Finals in the 60s and they lost, that he was miserable the whole summer, that he would get depressed and he get miserable because he lost. And obviously in the end, Jerry only won the one title, but I couldn't envision if you hadn't won multiple ones and then you lose this game. I mean, this would probably just make you sick. I feel like I'm sure multiple Celtics they probably felt sick the whole summer after this series.
Sure. And I mean, like Larry Bird specifically, like I know you've mentioned in the past some of these games, looking back on them and wondering what would be the sports talk going on the following day, or what would people be saying on social media, because Larry was struggling early on. And to be fair, in the first 5 minutes, both teams were struggling. Like you could just see how anxious everybody was. Magic even alludes to that over the game in an interview, that everybody just seemed like they were off their game and had nerves. But Larry Bird doesn't score his first basket until there's halfway through the third quarter. He gets his first field goal. He ends up shooting about 37% from the field, and he played 47 minutes. So he plays all but 1 minute of the entire game. And he comes on strong late. He adds 10 rebounds and 7 assists, so he kind of fills up the stat sheet. But I could just see the Skip Baylesses of the world and the the big time analysts just ripping him apart. I mean, to not score for the first 3 quarters essentially, or 2.5 quarters. So that was really crazy. But they had a chance to win it coming down late, and the way the game started to the way the game finished, I mean, it was another one of those iconic finishes where teams are just trading baskets back and forth. I mean, Michael Cooper hits a big three late, and then obviously Magic Johnson gets that sky hook, and Larry hit a three right before Magic's sky hook. So you're thinking, with the way everything's progressing, that the way baskets are falling right at the end of the game, Larry's going to hit that shot, but it was just a little bit long. Did you see James Worthy, by the way, guarding Larry Bird on that 3-pointer he made with just a minute left in the game? He's literally holding Larry Bird by his jersey, just clutching his jersey with both hands. And it's that is the most egregious hand check I've ever seen. And I was like, are the rest of us not seeing that? How are you not watching Larry Bird and James Worthy guarding him when Boston's on offense with a minute left to go? That was just unbelievable to me.
That was really bad. One thing I did notice during this game, there's a point where the ball goes out of bounds and they give it to the Lakers, and I definitely noticed it when they showed that replay. They briefly showed it because the refs just gave it to Lakers, and that was kind of it. Dude, there was at least 2 or 3 points in this game, that one included, where in today's modern NBA, it would have been just like the Zapruder film with JFK's assassination, where it's just they're re-examining it. And that's one thing I like about, at least in this era, I was thinking about during this game. I'm like, thank God you don't have to, you're looking at the specs with a magnifying glass to see who was out on, instead of just being oh, well, it's obvious this guy hit the ball out. And that kind of reminds me of Christmas Day this current season, where Patrick Beverley was with LeBron towards the end of the game, and they called it out on LeBron, even though Patrick Beverley kind of hit him. And I mean, it's kind of a weird thing. And I was thinking, probably that play, if it had happened in the 80s, they would have just given it to the Lakers, that Patrick Beverley play. And I mean, dude, even in this one too, man, at the end of the game, when it's the 2 seconds left, in real time today, that 2 seconds would have been 4 actual minutes between the timeout and all of this and that. It would have been so much more. And there it was just the 2 seconds happened, and then everyone's off the court within a minute. It seemed like the whole Lakers team they celebrate as they're walking and they're out of there.
Yeah, well, I mean, one play alludes to what you're talking about was Lakers possession, and it's right before Magic hits that baby skyhook, that iconic skyhook, and it's kind of a loose ball rebound. The ball gets knocked out of bounds, and it's called Lakers ball. I didn't have a good look at it. With instant replay, they're probably reviewing that one over and over again, but that was close. I mean, I wasn't so sure that was definitively Lakers ball. And so it would have been interesting to see that one over and over again, and probably adds a couple minutes to the runtime. But yeah, I mean, I think in many of those situations, I mean, I've seen it so many times, and I can't necessarily provide evidence of this, but so many situations where it's kind of a toss-up on who the ball goes to, so the referee gives it to the team that's down by a point, the team that needs it more, and just kind of to keep the game alive. And I felt like this might have been one of those situations again, and a lot like the Patrick Beverley and LeBron play earlier this year, on which was a nationally televised game where that was Lakers ball. We were thinking of the whole way because Beverly basically starts the ball escaping LeBron's hands, but as LeBron's fingertip that barely touches it last, and it's like up until instant replay existed, that is Lakers ball 100% of the time. And so you just wonder how many significant moments, like possibly this one in the 87 Game 4 finals, could have circumstances been changed.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I mean, I've heard Bill Simmons kind of complain about this before in his podcast. It's the idea of he's not really a fan of it. Sometimes like the over-examination of the instant replay, and it certainly takes you out of the game when it's 3 minutes of them really looking at it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I mean, I'm not only just saying this because in those two circumstances, one time the Lakers got screwed and one time, it helped us. Like, I mean, I just feel like just as a fan of the sport, just watching it, I mean, it kind of definitely does impact the ebb and flow of just a whole situation when it's your total long pause. And then I feel like they get it wrong a lot, to be honest with you. Or I watch it and I feel like even after it slowed down, a lot of times it's still not super conclusive.
The Celtics, I felt like in a couple instances, definitely got the short end of the stick in this game. Not that terribly agreed. One James Worthy play, but Larry Whitten nailed that three anyway.
Well, there was there was certainly nothing as bad as the 88 finals with the Pistons and the Lakers. There was nothing as egregious as some of the calls that went on in that, but especially and I think it was in our first episode where we talked about the last 2 or 3 seconds of that game. The Pistons are inbounding it and there's people on the court. I mean, that was far more egregious than anything in this game.
Yeah, but you don't hear anybody crying up a storm for Detroit outside of Detroit because they kind of built up some bad karma there a little bit. So Magic looked critical of Magic, some of Magic's performances. I don't know why. We've picked games where he hasn't played that well, but man, he was really the difference maker in this game. I mean, he scored 29 points. If this was the only game you ever watched of Magic Johnson, you wouldn't think he was a pass first type player. He was really aggressive this game.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I was thinking that a lot too during this game, is that at least out of the three so far, including this one that we've reviewed, I mean, definitely Magic, he looked like a superstar for sure. I mean, he looked incredible. I mean, he looked great. And again, I mean, you kind of talked about this earlier about the idea of what the sports pundits would say. And it would have been interesting to see kind of what the sports talking heads would have said. I mean, at this time, in 87, so Magic had won MVP that year, but obviously Bird had already won it as well. So it's like, I wonder who in the eyes of, your average Joe Schmo would have been considered the best player in the league. And would you have had this dynamic too where, I mean, I kind of think, just kind of on paper, I mean, you could certainly, I think, make an argument that Magic had a better supporting cast than Larry Bird. I mean, at least the names are bigger. I mean, maybe, the synergy that the Celtics players had together, you could say rivaled the Lakers, but I mean, the Lakers had a very stacked team. So it would be really interesting to see kind of like what you said, like Larry Bird. I mean, would people have made the argument where, oh, Larry didn't have enough help? I mean, would that have been a thing? Like, I don't know. What did you think about that? Do you feel like people at that time would have thought the Lakers were a more stacked team?
I do think it was somewhat common. I don't have the exact years memorized, but I remember at one point Larry Bird won 3 straight MVPs, and I don't think Magic got his couple of MVPs until after that. So I'll have to double check, but I'm not sure if Magic was actually the league MVP this year. He was the finals MVP, but I think Larry Bird was the MVP again of the league. And there was a lot of people saying that, actually, that Larry Bird was the better player. It wasn't, terribly common, but I remember Sports Illustrated wrote an article on it. He was on the cover, proclaimed as the best player in the league. I don't think anybody was saying really he didn't have enough help. I think what's really interesting this series is Kevin McHale's basically playing on a fractured foot. I mean, the dude's like a robot or something, because he literally went through the entire playoffs with a break in his foot, and I never see him wincing. I never see him showing any pain. His footwork's still gorgeous. He had a couple little fadeaway mid-range jumpers where he's spinning off of his apparent broken foot, and he's burying shots, and so that's pretty incredible. So I think, Larry might have been a little bit shorthanded there, but he still had Dennis Johnson. Danny Ainge is a great player. Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale are Hall of Famers. He had Bill Walton coming off the bench. So, I mean, that team's still pretty stacked as well. I think you could argue that Magic has the most stacked team, but I mean, if they're number one, the Celtics are probably number two in that area.
So I was just looking it up. So Larry Bird, he won the MVP 84 through 86 3-time. And then Magic's also 3-time, but he won it for that year 87. But I think that's something that's really fascinating about that debate between Magic and Larry at that era compared to like kind of the era preceding is because Magic and Larry were, for all intents and purposes, total contemporaries. I mean, they came in, 1 year apart from each other. I mean, they were in their prime at the same time, really competing. And I kind of feel like a lot of the times since then, I don't know, I kind of feel like there's been this little bit of, different eras, so to speak, or the idea of like almost like a handing off of the torch. I don't know, maybe I gotta think about that a little bit more because I'm trying to think about like LeBron compared to, well, I guess let's say if you take the last 15 years, so let's say since 2005, I mean, well, you had a LeBron Kobe debate, a LeBron Durant debate for a little while. I know there was a little bit of short-lived Curry and LeBron, and now even though I know Giannis and LeBron, I mean, they're kind of trying to build that up. I don't really know if I would say it's a debate on who's the best player, but there doesn't really seem to be a lot of like animosity towards them, or really they haven't really played that many meaningful games against each other. But I don't know, I think that's really fascinating. Like you compare that to now, and now it's basically who's ever going to be the next person against LeBron. And you think before that, I mean, I guess you did have the difference between, let's say, like Duncan and Kobe, but I don't know, I'd have to think about that a little bit more. I guess Kobe and Duncan would be the nearest thing to that since Bird and Magic, where you had two guys that are like basically total contemporaries of each other that are both on like great teams winning titles, and they're kind of in each other's way.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the Eastern Conference was definitely the stronger conference there. And so you could argue, if I was a Celtics fan, I would certainly argue that Bird had a bit of a tougher road because dealing with the Pistons in the East is difficult. Dealing with Philadelphia was great several years. I mean, in '83, they were absolutely fantastic, and even a little bit more into the mid 80s. So they were really good. And then even, Chicago emerging late in about 88, 89, 90. Although they didn't really run into the Celtics that much, but the Eastern Conference was definitely the stronger conference between the two. I think you basically had the Lakers and then the Rockets, just a little blip here and there as, the superior team. But other than that, I mean, the Nuggets were there sometimes. The Jazz weren't really that serious yet. I think Larry certainly had the tougher road, and to a certain extent, that's reflected in their championship count, 5-3.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point. Today's episode is also brought to you by Writer Junkie. Are you thinking about starting a business or a side hustle? Writer Junkie offers website development, content writing, and SEO services for businesses. Call Writer Junkie today at 805-587-7966, and you can visit them online at writerjunkie.com. We'd also like to thank the Tax Defense Group for being a sponsor. How many finals do you think since this one have we had a greater collection of talent at one time playing? Like just on the whole court, just generally speaking.
Yeah, in the two teams. Oh my gosh, that's a fantastic question. Really kind of makes you appreciate a little bit more what we're seeing. I don't think any of Chicago's championships were that. Maybe when you had Malone and Stockton, but I just still feel like Utah's team overall has enough, stars and it's deep enough. Maybe 2017.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. That for some reason that was the year that first came to my mind too, and that even though a lot of people remember back about that finals, like because it was 4-1. I mean, the Warriors, they definitely won it, but that 17 Cavs team, I really think was like they probably could have won it. Like that 17 Cavs team was better than the 16 Cavs team. I think the 17 Cavs team, if they were as good and kept Kyrie for 2018. I think they could have actually potentially won in 18, even with Durant on the Warriors. It was just 17, just the whole ball was just rolling so much for the Warriors. But yeah, in 17, that was quite a collection of talent. You had Durant, Curry, Iguodala, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, obviously LeBron, Kevin Love, Kyrie. Did they still have Richard Jefferson at the time? I mean, I know he was old, but I mean, just name brand wise, that was, if you live in the LA area or you watch like Spectrum and you watch a lot of the Lakers broadcasting, I mean, so many of these dudes, it's so crazy. Like, I mean, so many of the people that played on this Lakers team, like, have gone on to, you know, maybe even their names are a little bit bigger now than really maybe outsize how good of a player they were. But so many of these dudes, like, you know, Michael Coop or Byron Scott, like, I mean, obviously Byron Scott was a coach for a long time, but like, you just see these dudes around LA associated with Lakers stuff all the time. Like, that's a very common occurrence. I mean, even Kurt Rambis, I mean, him and his wife, like, kind of involved behind the scenes with the Lakers today. Like, it's just really interesting, all these names, and obviously Danny Ainge running the Celtics today. Kevin McHale, you know, being a coach for as long as he was. I mean, it's, yeah, a lot of people, a lot of brand names for sure were involved in this series.
It'd be interesting because, I mean, it's funny to think about that way. Like 20 years from now, it could be the same thing. Like LeBron's a higher up in the Lakers organization, and maybe like, you know, Danny Green's doing broadcasting or something like that, which I could totally see. And like JaVale McGee somehow involved. I don't even know what JaVale would do, but I hope he's still involved with the Lakers like 20 years from now because I love JaVale.
Out of all the current Lakers right now on the team, which one do you think is most likely to be the coach of the Lakers one day in the future?
Oh, shoot.
Dude, the first person that comes to my mind is actually Rondo.
Yeah, I was going to say Rondo. He's kind of like a coach on the court already. With his personality and everything. I can't remember if he's actually expressed interest in the idea of coaching down the road, but I could totally see that, and that was who I was thinking right before you said it too.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know what it is. I could see him. You know, the funnier thing would probably be to see J.R. Smith as a commentator, like akin to Robert Horry today. Could you imagine J.R. Smith?
I can't see that, dude. I can't see that. I would love to see that. But I really doubt that's going to happen. You know what's funny is we're talking about modern players and older players from this game. You know, the whole Klay Thompson and Michael Thompson's his dad. Michael Thompson does, commentating for the Lakers video broadcasts. But Michael Thompson's playing this game, and did you notice how, like, I just forgot, like, how whack his jump shot is? Like, he shot a couple jump shots, and it's like, dude, this is Klay Thompson's dad. Like, his form is just so crazy that it's hard for me to make that connection in my head. And, I just kind of forgot about that. So really kind of funny because you know the Del Curry and the Steph Curry thing, but both guys have a form like they could shoot. Like, both guys, they look accurate. They look like they know what they're doing. But then you got Klay Thompson, one of the greatest shooters ever, and his dad is out there looking like, you know, Gilchrist or something, just like with such a whack form.
Dude, that's a very good point, man. I mean, Michael Thompson and Klay, I mean, their games are like so different from one another. I mean, like you said, it's almost hard to believe that they're father and son when you see them play. And even the way that they look, like, yeah, Klay is, I mean, it's just so different. I mean, Michael was, I mean, obviously he was a really good player, but just totally not the same. That's really, I like that observation a lot. You know, what's one thing I thought was crazy too, was Kareem. I mean, dude, this guy's out here. He's 40 years old at this point. And, I mean, I thought he looked really solid this game.
Yeah, he was decent. I mean, you look at his percentage, and he was a little bit inefficient. But, I mean, it was surprising how I think we even talked about the game against the Rockets where Wilt Chamberlain was saying he had to, like, dominate that game and everything. And it's like, dude, he's in his late 30s. Like, I don't know what it was about Kareem's longevity or why people just expected so much from him. But, I mean, we've been doing a lot of games where Kareem's pushing either 40 years old or, you know, into his mid-30s, where we got to do one of these games where it's like a young 30-year-old Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, because we got to see him when he's really shining in his prime, because, you know, it's really incredible that I kind of forget sometimes that I'm watching like a 40-year-old Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, because you can't tell out there. Like, he's still as productive as the other guys, and he's still as competitive. He can still somehow run the floor with Magic Johnson. I mean, they have the most high-octane, fast-break offense in all of the 80s, and your center out there is 40 years old. So, I mean, shout out for that, man. That's incredible.
No, that is a very good point. I mean, Kareem, I mean, talk about a guy. I mean, it'd be so interesting to see him play today. Like if you could transport him into today's game, I mean, it'd be very fascinating to see how well he'd be regarded.
I feel like he'd basically be the same in any era because no matter, I mean, he like literally 80% of his shots are the skyhook. That is bread and butter, and there's not really much to his game outside of that in terms of like his scoring, but there doesn't need to be because it's just the most indefensible shot in NBA history. That when you got a 7'2" guy with the wingspan that he's got, putting it sky high, and I mean I see a lot of guys do the hook shot or try to mimic the hook shot. Like even for the Lakers, we had Andrew Bynum trying it for a while. You know, even Shaq had a little bit of a hook shot, but it's not the same. Like they get a little bit more arm action in there where like the entire arm's rotating, but Kareem would literally just put his hand sky high in the air and just a flick of the wrist like a jump shot. And that is so difficult to do, and I've never seen anybody shoot the hook shot like that. Like even with Magic's baby sky hook to win the game, there was a little bit more of a swinging motion of his entire arm and not so much the little flick of the wrist that Kareem always just does. So, I mean, that just even added to how indefensible that shot was.
Yeah, no, I mean, you raised a really good point. And yeah, I mean, even during this game, like you were saying, I mean, he's going up against guys that are literally 10 years younger than him, maybe even 15 years younger than him, and he's still shooting over them. I mean, just incredible. And I mean, the thing is, even now, it's like in the current NBA, it's like, I think you and I have kind of talked about this a little before, just the idea of, you know, I mean, really outside of LeBron, there's really no one else that's like a great player, like all-star level player that's really above the age of like mid-30s. Like next to LeBron, who was even the oldest all-star this season next to LeBron was probably Chris Paul, right? And after Chris Paul, I mean, was there really anybody that was over the age of like 32? I guess I'd have to think about that.
Weird. For all the talk about how modern medicine has improved, modern training methods have improved, there's really not a bunch of great old players in the league right now. Because, I mean, even if you look at the league averages, like if you look it up online, I was literally looking at it like 2 days ago, and the NBA's the youngest it's been. I think the average player is like 26.1 years old. And that's like the youngest the NBA's been since like the 70s. I'd have to check to be sure, but like the NBA is so young right now, which is crazy because we don't even have guys coming straight out of high school. I mean, it's close. I mean, you have a lot of one and done guys, and then you know we're even getting more and more European players, and so that probably has a lot to do with it. But yeah, the league's just really, really young right now, and yeah, it's important to appreciate these guys like the Kareems, like the LeBrons, you know, guys who play really good into their late 30s. That's actually my next video. I'm going to be talking about LeBron. Is he the best ever at this stage of his career, you know, which is 35 years old, year 17. There's not many guys like Kareem and LeBron who were doing it that late.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember you and I, we talked on the phone the other night about that subject matter, and I think that's a very good idea for like a video. I mean, you look at so many of the guys now, and yeah, you're right. I mean, I was thinking about the other day, or maybe like a couple years ago, I was thinking about the All-Star game, and yeah, it was like, how many of these dudes are there? I mean, I guess I'm trying to think. I mean, so you have like a Kyle Lowry, because I think he's like 33, 34. I think Chris Paul's 34 or 35. Obviously, LeBron's 35, but I kind of even feel like for
superstars, not like the JJ Redicks and the Kyle Korvers.
Yeah, like top guys. And I mean, I know Chris Paul had a little bit of a resurgence here, but yeah, I mean, definitely if you were to look at the consensus top 10, what most people consider the top 10 players this past season, and you know, no particular order, I think if you had to average out their age, yeah, probably would be late 20s, right? Probably 27, 28, something like that. I mean, I'm just trying to think of, because even Kawhi, I remember looking it up. I think Kawhi is like within like 2 months of exactly the same age I am. So I think he's 29. Yeah, it's very Yeah. Well, I guess that's a little bit of a tangent on the age of the players, but yeah, this one obviously this game was a very iconic game, and I also wanted to point out just the idea that since this series happened, the Celtics have only won one title since '87. They just won the title in 2008, and for all the talk about how good the Celtics are, and this year, putting Jason Tatum next to Giannis and LeBron and Kawhi as being one of the top players in the league, I just think it's funny that that team only has the one title. And even us, I mean, we're tied for the most since '87. I mean, obviously got one more with Showtime and then the Kobe titles.
I'm going to be a little fair here because I know there's no Boston Celtic fans to defend themselves here. But if you want to point out that they've only won one championship since since '86, they would be quick to point out that they say they have 17 championships and we say we have 16, but we really have like 11 because those Minneapolis ones shouldn't count. I think I was listening to Bill Burr. I'm not sure if you ever listened to him.
Oh yeah.
Funny comedian. He's a huge Celtics fan. And so, yeah, he was going on a tangent about that, about how Laker fans are like, oh, we got one less championship. We're coming to get you guys. And he's like, the hell you do? It's like, you guys are like 5 championships behind us. Those ones in Minnesota don't count.
I can see where they're coming from. I mean, if we win the title this year, obviously, I'll consider it 17. I'm not going to consider it 12. Yeah, man. I mean, it's going to be a really interesting dynamic. I actually remember thinking when Kyrie Irving, when he got traded to the Celtics in the summer of 2017, I remember thinking at that time, I'm like, oh man, this was a year before LeBron came to LA. I remember thinking like, oh, probably LeBron will come to the Lakers and we'll probably see a Celtics-Lakers finals eventually one day where Kyrie Irving would be on the Celtics and LeBron would be with the Lakers. And I just remember really thinking that. And then especially when LeBron did come here, I was like, oh wow, the table's totally set. We could eventually one day see Lakers, Celtics. Then you also have this undercurrent rivalry of Kyrie versus LeBron. And obviously we're not going to get that now, but that would have been a really interesting finals, I think. I don't really know if the Lakers and Celtics will meet again anytime soon, but yeah, I think that would have been a really interesting one though.
Yeah, for sure. I got a question for you. The Celtics, how do you feel about them really? Like do you really hate the Celtics? Because I remember when I was younger, I hated the Pistons. Like I don't think I've ever hated a team. And again, I wasn't old enough to watch those games in the 80s. I was born in '89. But I was watching on VHS tapes in the mid-90s, so at the time I was watching it like it was brand new, and I remember just hating Bill Laimbeer. I couldn't stand him, and I couldn't stand Isaiah Thomas. I couldn't stand Chuck Daly for just letting him do all that crap. I couldn't stand how they took pride in it. I just hated all of Detroit. There's been few times where I actually felt like I hated the Celtics, because it's that kind of funny dynamic where it's like they share so much history with you as a Lakers fan, and there's that rivalry there. And when you were talking about Kyrie, like on the Celtics and stuff, we were almost like, I almost felt like I was hoping for that to happen. Like I want them to make it to the finals so we could face them there, just because it makes it more special. Like that doesn't sound like you really hate them. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, there's definitely individual Celtics players that over the years I've definitely disliked. I mean, I really never liked Kevin Garnett. Paul Pierce, I think, is very annoying. But I kind of liked Ray Allen. Like, I like Ray Allen even to this day. And I think even, back to the 80s Celtics, I like Larry Bird. I like Kevin McHale as people. I have no problems with them at all. I think you're right. I don't really actually... in current-day Celtics teams, I really don't like Marcus Smart at all. And I think the Jason Tatum hype is he's like the emperor wears no clothes, that parable where it's the emperor's naked and people are telling him, oh my gosh, you wear the most beautiful garment ever. I kind of look at Tatum like that, but that's not really his fault. I mean, he's not telling the media to talk him up like crazy. I mean, that's just the media's. I don't actually completely hate them. I mean, it's kind of what you were saying. I mean, the fact that they do have all this history and the fact that they do have all these all-time great players. I mean, I think that does kind of make them worthy opponents somewhat. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I obviously I would always root against the Celtics again, anytime they play us or most teams. But I will say, like, for this coming year, like, if the Lakers and Celtics did meet in the NBA Finals in 2020, I think that would probably make for, at least from the storyline standpoint, it would make that a better storyline than, let's say, Lakers and Bucks. Because, like, I look at Lakers and Bucks, and although I think that those are the best two teams in the league, and I think that the Giannis LeBron kind of clash is very interesting, and I think it would make for very good basketball. There's really no bad blood between those teams. Or even, let's say you're a person, you're like, oh, well, the Clippers are better than Lakers. It's like, okay, fine. Clippers and Bucks. Is there any animosity towards those teams? There's like nothing. There's no history really. Maybe somebody can drag it up, but like, I know Kawhi and Giannis last year in the playoffs, but I don't know. It just doesn't feel as special. I think Lakers Celtics sounds so much more special than Clippers and Bucks.
Yeah, I definitely think there is something special to that, but I do think they could find some storylines if they wanted to. I know LeBron remembers Giannis putting on the crown. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. That's true.
Giannis is putting on the crown. They probably show that clip like a million times leading up to a Lakers Bucks, finals, and just remind us that, okay, this is what happened earlier in the year. What's going to happen now? Who's going to be the king at the end of this series? Mm. And then I would hope, if it was Clippers and Bucks, I would hope that both of the fantastic wing leaders would get hyped up for that, Kawhi and Giannis. You can't really call Giannis a wing; he's a huge dude. But the way Kawhi just totally outplayed him last year, like, I would hope that Giannis would have a chip on his shoulder in that series. And if I was a part of the media, that would be the part I would be puffing up and trying to hype everybody up about, is saying, like, these guys, they have a little bit of a point to prove. Giannis is going to either hold it down and still prove that he's in his mind the best player in the league, or Giannis is like, no, I'm taking over. You're not going to make a fool of me 2 years in a row. So a little bit exciting. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. We talked about this again. I think the last time we spoke off air, but yeah, if Giannis, for sure, if he won the title this year, regardless if he beat the Lakers or the Clippers in the finals, I think he probably would be considered the best player in the league for sure. I don't know what the argument would be against him outside of Kawhi or LeBron getting injured in the playoffs, but like, yeah, I don't know. There is something though, kind of getting back to your point, like, there is something a little special between, the Lakers and Celtics. And again, it's still, I know some of that sounds so cliched because, the media's talked about it so much over the years, but dude, it's true. Even at the end of this game, it's Larry Bird hits a clutch three. Then on the other side of the court, Magic hits a clutch, baby skyhook right at the end. Dude, right down to the wire. When Magic, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but could you imagine being a Lakers fan like our age right now in 87, and there's 5 seconds left to go, and Magic is dribbling it in, and he's faced with this wall where it's like you got 3 Celtics in front of him, shoots over them and hits it. Dude, that would have been, I think I would have just gone nuts watching that in real time, not knowing the result.
Really, all you got to do is ask my dad. Because my dad, oh my gosh, he's always been a casual Lakers fan ever since the 80s, but he was so invested in the 80s. And you ask him, he hates the Celtics 100%, which I understand. If you lived through the 80s rivalry and how many times those teams played each other because there was less teams in the league, and the way they were fighting basically like every freaking game, there's like a fight breaks out, then I would understand how you'd hate those guys. But that was really a gutsy play by Magic, just going back to that baby skyhook, because he sees that McHale's on him. Now again, McHale has a banged up foot, but he's not really showing it. He's not clearly laboring, but he takes it to the basket once he sees McHale's on him. And I remember Magic saying that in an interview, that once he saw McHale was on him, he's like, oh, I'm taking this. But McHale, apparently, it's speculated that he has an 8-foot long wingspan. And so Magic's dribbling towards the middle of the court, which would be like the longest wingspan of all time. And you just look at him, and there's like serious like Stretch Armstrong action going on. And so when Magic takes it down the middle, and then Robert Parrish leaves Kareem. So Kareem was kind of open underneath. He could have thrown maybe a bounce pass, maybe gone behind the back. He could have tried, or a lob pass over the top. But he still goes for that hook shot with the outstretched arms of Parrish and McHale, both contesting it. And so really just an incredible shot. He basically gets high-fived by McHale as he's releasing the shot. I mean, yeah, just a beautiful moment from Magic scoring the ball when that wasn't really what he was known for, what he was famous for, but you would think so if you just saw that play.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the kind of thing, too, where you just look at it, it's like, wow, like, dude, this guy Magic, I mean, I know sometimes it's, you know, like, it's just the believed, I don't know what you'd even call it, like the standard belief. It's like, oh, well, Magic is, you know, like one of the all-time greatest players. And I think that, obviously, I mean, it's true, man, I'm not like denying that at all. But I think sometimes, like even for myself, I've kind of had this where it's, you just take something without really actually doing the examination yourself. It's like, oh yeah, Magic's one of the greats. But like, if you don't actually watch the games that go back, like you can see why they say that. And this is definitely one of those examples where you look at it for Magic, it's like, oh, now I see why people say that. Especially if you're a younger basketball fan. Let's say if you're, you know, 25 years old or something like that, and you've really been into the game for, let's say, 10 or 15 years. So you basically are totally removed from, you know, this era of basketball. I mean, this is definitely a prime example of why so many people talk up Magic, rightfully. You know, like, I'm not saying they're exaggerating at all. It's just, you can really get to look at how good he was. And dude, I imagine, man, in Boston that day, people must have been so angry. People must have just been just so furious, man. I mean, this was definitely, I mean, I know, again, you know, and I know we kind of wanted to do it too for this series where we're not only talking about Lakers and Celtics, because even though this is, so far we've been talking a lot about the Showtime era Lakers, I mean, everyone kind of sees them synonymously with the Celtics, and kind of like, you know, as you pointed out before, I mean, there's so many classic games that the 80s Lakers were involved with outside of the Celtics. So, but yeah, I mean, at the same token, it's kind of like, well, you know, they're synonymous with each other for a reason. It's not just randomly. I mean, it's like Batman and the Joker. It's like Joker's Batman's biggest villain. You can't every episode of Batman or every movie can't be Clayface versus Batman. You gotta give the people what they know or what they expect, which is obviously Lakers and Celtics. But yeah, man. Well, Jonny, with that said, dude, yeah, definitely this is a good recommendation for a game, and definitely look forward to the next one. I know we've talked a little bit about the next game, but yeah, man. Well, definitely thank you again for coming on. And how can people watch the stuff that you have on your channel?
Yeah, I've got a couple things going right now. I've got my GOAT series going, which is where I'm basically making the argument and explaining the depth of the greatest teams of all time. And by the end of the series, I'll, you know, give my opinions on who I actually think were the greatest teams ever. I just made one on the 71-72 Lakers. So Wilt Chamberlain, Gail Goodrich, Jerry West. They won 33 games in a row and such. And I'll be making one on the 1987 Lakers soon. So this championship Lakers team, they'll be getting a one in the series pretty soon. So yeah, Jonny Arnett's my YouTube channel. I definitely recommend checking it out if you're a Lakers fan or just a basketball fan in general. And if you appreciate basketball history, you'll like it even more. If
you had to say if that 71-72 Lakers team played the 87 or 86-87 Lakers team, who do you think would win in a best of seven?
It'd be close. I mean, it'd be crazy high scoring, that's for sure, because fast breaks would just be insane. Because I'm not sure if everybody knows this. I mean, a lot of people don't know about the 71-72 Lakers, but Bill Sharman came in and coached that team and was really pushing the fast break. And that was just kind of his idea of what would be successful basketball, which was kind of a weird concept at first because the Lakers are kind of a little bit of an older team. But it worked beautifully with Gail Goodrich. You know, he was spotting up and he was hitting jumpers. Wilt Chamberlain was almost built for that. You know, the way he just dominated on the rebounds and the way he could throw perfect pinpoint outlet passes. I mean, if you look up some of the Wilt Chamberlain highlights from that year, I mean, he's like a quarterback out there. He gets it, and immediately he's hitting a guy, you know, 50, 60, 70 feet down the court, and they're scoring 2 points off of it. So That would have been very, very fast paced game. I mean, if you made me pick, oh God.
Well, I don't mean to cause distress.
Rambling, I'm kind of avoiding the answer like a politician where I'm just talking about it, but it would have to go to the 87 Lakers because not only is basketball, you could argue basketball has advanced 15 years at that point, but for some reason, I just feel like the fast-paced tempo would play into the Showtime Lakers' hands. And you could argue the same thing with the 72 Lakers, but I still felt like it was a little bit newer for them. And so I feel like 87 would really take advantage of that style. Because, I mean, whenever they played the Celtics would try to do the opposite. They'd try to take the Lakers out of what they're comfortable doing and making it a more half-court game. And when they were able to do that, that's when the Lakers would sometimes struggle. So I think in 7 games, I'd go with the 87 Lakers.
Talk about that being an all-time series, though.
Yeah, and we haven't even got into the 01 Lakers yet. You throw them into the mix, and yeah, you can have a whole playoff bracket of the greatest Laker teams ever.
I know, man. It's what are they? Gosh, I can't even think of the proper term for it, but it's definitely like a spoiling impact. I mean, when you even for us now, it's like, LeBron and Davis. I mean, I think a lot of us may have kind of underappreciated the fact that, like, if LeBron and Davis win a couple titles together, they're going to probably be considered one of the greatest tandems ever. I'm not saying the greatest, but, like, certainly if they win a couple titles, they'll be in the contention for potential one of the greatest tandems ever. And I feel like we kind of just take that a little bit for granted. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with like modern day sports media where everything is so dissected, and every day it seems like the media is like, oh, well, if the Trailblazers get in, they're going to be a threat to beat the Lakers, and well, the Pelicans can steal 2 games to the Lakers in a playoff, and the Jazz could beat them. I mean, it's like all the pundits are basically saying anybody could beat us, but like every single team, and it becomes a little numb after a while, a little kind of null and void when it's like, oh, like any team can beat us. Teams that are under 500 are going to beat us. I mean, barring an injury, I mean, that has happened so rarely, but be that as it may, like, yeah, man, I mean, we're talking, dude, so many historic tandems. I mean, 70s West and Chamberlain, 80s Kareem and Magic, obviously the 1000s Shaq and Kobe, now Davis and LeBron, or even too Kobe and Gasol. It's like, I mean, it's a beautiful thing, but if you hate the Lakers, then, you're probably really not going to like Giannis and Luka when they come here at the same time. But maybe that's just a conversation for another day, maybe. But
if you hate the Lakers, you're not listening this far into the podcast, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's probably true. But all right, Johnny, thanks, man. I appreciate you coming on, dude, and I will talk to you later.
Yeah, looking forward to the next one, bro. Talk to you later.
All right, take care.